This week on the WriterCon podcast.
Always keep moving. Keep your characters moving. Keep them moving forward. Give them an objective and let them work toward it. And start putting obstacles in their way, and bigger obstacles until they get to that objective.
Welcome to WriterCon, a gathering place for writers to share their knowledge about writing and the writing world. Your hosts are William Bernhardt, best-selling novelist and author of the Red Sneaker books on writing, and Lara Bernhardt, award-winning author of the Wantland Files book series.
There, writers. This is our first podcast for November 2023, so I have two super special announcements. First, this time around, we're interviewing William Martin, one of the most successful, big shot, big time best-selling authors we've had the pleasure of having on this podcast. Second, the next issue of the all-new WriterCon magazine is about to be released. Lara, that magazine is kind of you and Katie's project, but
a little bit, yeah.
What are we gonna WriterCon magazine? That's so awkward. Can we call it the WriterCon zine or Ritzine or Wuxza? I'm doing the initials. You're the one who told me that tonight we're watching FNAP, right?
That is true. Fair
Five
point.
Nights at Freddy's.
Hang on.
WriterCon zine.
WriterCon magazine, though, could be Wookum.
What about MagCon?
MagCon.
Yeah, it's like a magazine about WriterCon, right? You know. Anyway.
Okay, we'll work on that.
Let's workshop that. Listeners, if you have any ideas, send them in.
Yes, absolutely.
Send your brilliant ideas to Bill.
Yeah.
Contests. Tell us what to call this, and we will give you credit in the magazine. Great idea. Now we got a contest going.
Nice.
This is exciting. But beyond the contest, Lara, can you tell us what's actually going to be in this magazine?
Oh, yes. Yes, definitely. We have some excellent inspirational pieces again, as well as some instruction for our aspiring authors. We have Tamara back giving us some fantastic advice on how to world build in the future. And this is some good stuff. Really like that. And
she did the piece on AI on the last issue. I thought that was terrific.
Yes, AI was good. And now we're going to talk about world building in the future. She's got some really good advice. So if you're a fantasy author, you don't want to miss that. Authors in general, though, we're going to have some advice on how to use the guidelines from the hero's journey to help you shape your story. And this is something that can be applied to any written piece of work, honestly. So this is a pretty fascinating piece. Christy Duker's.
Yes, Christy's piece on how she got published the first time, right? I love that.
Christy's piece is wonderful. Again, inspirational, amusing, so sweet. She just writes the most poignant works. I love hers.
Yeah. Wow.
And more. And I think we're going to have, and I believe can I share a potential maybe, but don't hold me to it?
Sure. Because people would be pretty upset if I said no at this point. So go for it.
I think we're going to start adding in a regular column with book reviews in it.
Cool.
I'm excited about that. We don't have our first one just yet, but I'm excited about that.
Okay, WriterCon magazine. If you're interested, please go to Substack and search for WriterCon and decide whether you want to subscribe or not. Our interview today is with William Martin, which I think I already mentioned because I'm pretty excited about this. This is the man critics have dubbed the, quote, king of the historical thriller. His most recent of many huge New York Times best-selling novels is called December 41, which, as you probably guessed from the title, involves Pearl Harbor and its aftermath. But he's also written The Lincoln Letter and Cape Cod and a host of other prominent and genuinely important historical novels. And we will talk about all that. But first, the news. Jesse, take may have already heard about this first story because it has gotten so much press online. I mean, far more than book stories normally get, and especially articles about the decor in bookstores. But that's exactly what we've got now because apparently, as first reported by the New York Times, many Barnes& and Noble stores are ditching that kind of green stripe hunter green wall thing, and now they're painting it over with sandy shades of white or pink or whatever that particular bookstore thinks might work in that particular area. In other words, more individualization. They're not all the same. And this is, of course, the work of James Daunt, who we've mentioned before, is in charge of Barnes& and Noble now. He is British. He first founded Daunt Books, and then he was appointed to Waterstones and basically rescued that large book chain. And then when that hedge fund, Elliott Advisors, took over Barnes& and Noble by buying the majority stake, they brought Daunt over to try and see if they could turn Barnes& and Noble around after years of losing money. And he seems to have helped. They're not bleeding money anymore like they were, although there's a lot of room for improvement. And that's probably what this is about. Not making it look like the same old boring, I shouldn't have said that, the same old Barnes and Noble, but one that has modular fixtures that can be snapped out and combined so they can show vinyl records if they want, or tote bags or whatever. I looked at some of those pictures and it looked more like that uh, dress store our daughters keep taking me to, Anthropology, that's what it kind of looks like now. I don't know, but Jesse, I'll talk to someone who I know goes to bookstores, even though you're not actually a writer yourself. Do you think that this will be the move that finally makes Barnes and Noble financially secure?
Well, I don't know if it's going to make them financially secure, but I do know it is a good, smart business idea because let the bookstores, individualize themselves from whatever market they're in. Like Barnes and Nobles don't need to look the same, right? Let them, they come in all different shapes and sizes. Let them have some fun. Like it'll make it interesting. It'll make you want to stop into a Barnes and Noble you've never gone to before to see what it looks like.
That'd be nice.
So,
I like Hunter Green, but it may be time
yeah,
change.
yeah, have some fun.
Laura, what do you think? Or do you have some other idea they might have for increasing their sales numbers, like carrying more of our books? Or
well, obviously, I'm always going to be behind that. But you know me, I will use the same thing until it falls apart. I usually, when I like something, I like it, and that's it. We just determined that the jacket I'm wearing is like 20 years old, and you asked why? Why are you still wearing that? Because I'm not one to change for change's sake. That said, I think this looks gorgeous, and I don't think there's anything wrong with them transitioning, making some changes to change with the times. And I'm behind this. I'm actually excited to get to see one of these stores. It looks very pretty. It gives me a nice, calm, soothing feeling when I look at it. We know people who, some young people even, a daughter and a husband, love to just go to the Barnes and Noble nearby, and they just go spend time in it. They go up and down the aisles. They enjoy looking at not just the books, but games and other things that they have on hand there. Having some coffee, make it a place to go socialize. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, that's great. Whereas they do that all the time. Whereas I'm still sulking because Barnes and Noble wouldn't hang any signs about WriterCon in its window, but I'll probably carry that to the grave. And it really has nothing to do with the decor. So
just corporate policy. The manager did ask if she could have one for herself personally. So we'll give her some.
Hire good employees.
Listen, maybe this philosophy will lead to individual stores being allowed to make decisions on their own for involving the local community. So
yeah, maybe so. All right, news story number 2, which is really 2 stories, but I'm kind of cheating so Amazon does not completely dominate the lineup. But just as there's a chance you've already seen this story about Barnes and Noble Decor, given how much press it's received, you may also have heard about Amazon's stellar third quarter earnings. This commercial giant shot up. Its stock price went crazy, and after all our trading just a few days ago as we record this, apparently in Q3 their ad revenues spiked 26% to about 12 billion, which was well ahead of what was expected. Their overall revenue is, get this is gargantuan, 143 billion, which is up 13% from what analysts expected. So at the same time that Meta and Tesla and everybody else in tech is seeing horrible numbers, Amazon stock is up about 45% so far this year.
Wow.
It almost seems trivial to mention the other part because clearly Amazon is doing something right. But
it's like Taylor Swift, right? She was already almost a billionaire, and now she is a billionaire. So they just keep raking it in.
And when she writes her biography, which seems inevitable, they will do the Barnes Noble over in her color, right? And what is her? Never mind. And the other Amazon story is that they're now allowing authors in their author central area to recommend books. I mean, just to be clear, you could before, but you didn't get any credit for it. But now they've got it set up with 2 columns, and if you submit 3 book recommendations or more, they will allow you to push those to the people who follow you. Just to be clear, on your Amazon author page, which you should set up if you haven't already, people can go in and follow you so that they're notified anytime you have a new book. But you don't have access to that list over Amazon. Only Amazon does. So it's not like you can use, wouldn't you like to have that list to promote whatever? But now there's another way to access it. You can get there through book recommendations. And like I said, you can answer questions. You can do recommendations about your own books. You can do recommendations about other people's books. And those at some point will be pushed to your followers. So Laura, you brought this story to my attention.
Yeah.
Do you think this is going to be a valuable publicity avenue for authors?
I'm excited to try it and see. I think anything that could potentially help is worth trying. I personally think that Amazon is trying to compete with BookBub on this because BookBub absolutely encourages you to go follow authors, get out there and claim your own books, but also recommend others, follow other authors. And when you do push those recommendations that you make, they go to people. I get those from BookBub all the time. This person that you read or this person that you follow recommended this book. You probably want to give it a try. So I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see something like that coming to us from Amazon. I have a feeling that's the model that they're trying to emulate.
Okay, Jesse. So you're reading your email, we'll say, and you see this book recommendation from some rando author, let's say me. Are you going to buy a book just because you saw an Amazon recommendation in your inbox?
I mean, I think if I take the other part of my life, the other things I follow, like I listen to when a music artist I like talks about their influences and names a specific album, I will go listen to that album. So I think if there's not like, listen, if Brandon Sanderson put out a list of authors to read, I would probably check some of those out.
Really?
So yeah.
When I get those emails from BookBub, I almost always click on them and look. I'll look at the book that has been recommended and I'll ask myself, does that sound like something I'd like too? I think it has the potential to be nice little networking.
Yeah. Like if I'm waiting, and I'll continue to wait for whenever the next Game of Thrones books come out, if George R. R. Martin recommends a book, I'll read that because I got nothing else to read. So I'll tell you whose recommendations I won't read, though. James Patterson. Coming for you, brother. All right. It's been too long.
You're going to be reading the AI-generated version of Game of Thrones ending before you read.
Listen, that's George R. R. Martin's fault, not mine. So get clacking.
Brought it on himself.
Yeah, he brought it on himself. That's true.
All right, Jesse, cue up the music. Let's talk to William Martin. William Martin, welcome back to the podcast.
Hello, glad to be here. Hello, Lara. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Well, as a friend of this podcast, you know what I'm going to ask first.
Yes.
If you could offer writers one piece of advice, what would it be?
Always keep moving. Keep your characters moving.
Ooh,
Keep
good.
them moving forward. Give them an objective and let them work toward it. And start putting obstacles in their way, and bigger obstacles until they get to that objective. The best stories are about forward momentum. And if you don't have forward momentum, you don't have a story. So that's
great advice.
The other advice is keep your day job.
Also great advice.
from a guy who was fortunate enough never to have a day job.
But I bet you've given that advice on several occasions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, can you tell us
including to my son?
Right, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yes.
He ignored it.
You have a recent release out from last summer, yes? Can you tell us about December 41?
December 41 is a World War II thriller, a little bit of a departure for me. A World War II thriller that begins on the day after Pearl Harbor, when the FBI raids a fascist compound in Southern California. A place, by the way, that you can still visit if you know where to look for it. You drive out Sunset Boulevard, and right opposite the Riviera Country Club, you take a right and get up into the hills. And way back up in there is the spookiest damn place you've ever seen. You'll find the powerhouse, the fuel tanks, the water tanks, the terraced gardens that they had planted back up in there. And you can also find the plans at the UCLA archives, the plans for a 40-room mansion that was to go in there and was intended to have been Hitler's Western White House. And in the book, as it happened, the FBI raided this compound and arrested everybody down there on the day after Pearl Harbor. But in the book, one guy gets away, and he's the one they should have caught, because his job is to get himself to Washington, D.C. and shoot Franklin Roosevelt on Christmas Eve when he lights the national Christmas tree. Complications ensue.
That's a great premise. What a great setup. Fascinating. I remember the last time you came to WriterCon, except I'm not sure we called it WriterCon yet, but at any rate, I remember you gave a great talk, fascinating, really, about sort of the genesis of the Lincoln Letter, because that may have been your most recent one then, and the research you did. What kind of research and work did you do to prepare for this book?
Well, with this one, first of all, the idea came to me when I was watching the movie Darkest Hours with Gary Oldman as Winston Churchill.
Oh, right, yes.
We're in this packed theater right after Christmas, and everybody was really into the movie. And there's a scene about halfway through, right at what we writers like to call the midpoint turn, where Churchill faces his darkest hour, when he picks up the phone and calls Franklin Roosevelt and begs him for help. It's May of 1940. France is falling. The Nazis are moving on Dunkirk. Everything seems as black as it could ever be. And Churchill begs Roosevelt for help. And Roosevelt says, "I can't help you. American politics ties my hands." Churchill hangs up the phone, and the camera pulls back, and he slumps in despair. And as I watched that scene, I thought to myself, in a year and a half, right after Pearl Harbor, those two men will stand together on the south portico of the White House to express the unity of our two countries and to light the national Christmas tree on Christmas Eve. That's the kicker in the book, by the way. The German assassin gets all the way to Boston, to Washington, and finds, when he opens the newspaper, that Churchill's there too. So he can really get a twofer in this assassination attempt. But when I first saw that in the movie and I thought about it, I said, what a target they will make. And that's just by the dinner that my wife and I had after dinner, after the movie. By that time, I had it well underway in my head as to what this would be and
I
how it would
totally get
unfold.
that.
Yeah.
And sometimes, you go to conferences or whatnot, and people say, where do you get ideas? And I think, how do you not get them?
Yeah.
You read a book,
Yep.
you read the newspaper, and that's an example of no one else but
Yep.
you had that
Yeah.
experience when they watched that movie.
That's right.
But it was
That's right.
totally worthwhile.
And so then, to answer your other question about research, well, we got to go to that Nazi compound. We knew where to find it in Los Angeles. Whenever we would go to Los Angeles, I'd say to my son, who lives out there, okay, I have a scene in the Bradbury building. Let's go there. I have a couple of scenes in Musso and Frank's, the famous old watering hole in Hollywood. So let's go down to Hollywood Boulevard and have a few meals at Musso and Frank's. And, then, of course, there are scenes in Union Station. We walked the ground of Union Station in Los Angeles. We talked about traveling on Amtrak from Los Angeles to Chicago because, of course, the middle of the book takes place on the Santa Fe Super Chief. I kind of envisioned this whole novel as a 1940s spy thriller, something that Hitchcock would have made, and naturally, you've got to have a train trip in one of these books. But the Santa Fe Super Chief was the Grand Hotel on wheels, and Amtrak, even when you get one of those roomettes, it's not quite the same experience. And so we decided that we'd pass on that, and I'd use my imagination. However, we were up in Northern California visiting our other son and his family, and in Sacramento, there is a spectacular museum for anybody that's interested in railroading, and a museum where they actually have giant locomotives and so forth, and they have the actual dining car that was in that consist, which is what they called those trains. All of those Santa Fe Super Chief trains, each car had a name, and it was like a sailing vessel going across America. And so we walked onto that dining car, and I grabbed my camera and I started taking pictures in every direction, saying, "I'm in a scene from my novel." And naturally, I photographed the menu that was framed, hanging on the wall, so that everything the characters eat on the train trip was on the menu in 1941.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's fantastic.
Including the most expensive item on the menu, a bottle of Veuve Clicquot champagne for the princely sum of $9.95.
Oh, wow.
Folks. Wow.
It's a little bit more expensive now.
Yeah, a little bit.
And you don't get Veuve Clicquot on Amtrak.
No matter how much money you've got.
That's right.
Hey, you alluded to this earlier, but I so remember hearing you give the talk where, among other things, you talked about, your son informing you that he wanted to be a writer, and you replying, "I'd really rather you went to law school."
That's right.
Was so classic. Here's this hugely successful writer saying, "Hey, let's have some sense." But it makes me wonder, how did you become a writer?
Well, I said to my father when I was graduating from college, Dad, I want to go to film school. Uh, and he said, film school? I'd really rather see you go to law school.
Same thing.
But if you don't do what you want to do when you're young, you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder.
Oh, good work, Dad.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
And then when Dan graduated from college and said to me, Dad, I want to go to film school, I said, film school, et cetera, et cetera.
That's fantastic.
And of course, now he writes games.
Yeah, I've
That's
played
so
half of
cool.
that Star Trek game.
Yeah.
I got stuck.
You
Tell
pl-
him I
you-
can't get past the tachyons part.
Because of the, is there a glitch in it or?
No, I'm just not
No.
good at it.
Oh, okay. Okay. I guess that might be a good thing if it's challenging enough for you. I don't know.
Challenging.
No,
And
I
he's
need-
probably not devoting, days and days at a time.
Yeah.
Maybe if you had nothing else you were doing, Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
but-
he wrote 1,400 pages of screenplay for that game.
Wow.
I
Because
can't even imagine.
and this could be a topic where you could have him on. He'd be great to talk with
Make a note
about
for him.
writing this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the incredible challenge that it is to write a game. Because when we write a novel or a screenplay, we're thinking down the page and then turn the page and down the page. But when they design these games and write these games, it's almost like this row of capillaries going out because every decision that the character makes has to be scripted, and then that leads to another series of decisions that will be made in the next scene. I don't know how they do it. It's hard enough to do the straight line material that we do, but
Right.
yeah,
Anticipating all those contingencies that that
Yeah.
kind of spider web out every time somebody makes a choice. I just think, ugh, man.
yeah.
Well, you mentioned film work. I know you're kind of a film buff. I
Yeah.
remember us being at a New York breakfast cafe with your wife arguing
Yeah.
about Jaws, I think. But
Oh,
you
I
actually
remember the breakfast. I
remember
didn't remember the
breakfast.
argument.
I
There you go. Discussion.
I remember breakfast. Yeah.
Detailed discussion about the evolution of Jaws. Anyway, you actually wrote the script for what is now a stone cold cult classic,
That's true.
Humanoids from the Deep. Humanoids from the Deep. Tell us
Yes.
that story, would you please?
Well, after I graduated from film school, one of my professors, who was a longtime script doctor, and he made money writing exploitation and low budget features for Roger Corman, the king of the B pictures.
Mhm.
Then and actually now he's still well into his 90s. He's still going, and of course Corman had given a start to Martin Scorsese and Jack Nicholson and Robert De Niro and all of that generation, just a little bit older than I am. All of them got their start with Roger Corman. So when Corman's story editor, with whom I had developed a relationship, called me up one day, right after I had finished my first novel, but before it had spent 14 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, that lightning strike hadn't happened yet. She called me up and said, "We have an assignment for you." I said, "Oh, yeah?" And she said, we have is the title and the tagline." And I said, "What's the title?" And she said, "Humanoids from the Deep." I said, "What's the tagline?" "They're not human, but they hunt human women. Not for killing, for mating." And at that point, I was hooked. How could I turn that down? And that damn movie, according to at least one report that I have read, was the second most financially successful movie of the summer of 1980, surpassed only by The Empire Strikes Back.
Wow.
But That had a
But
bigger budget, though. That's not
yeah,
really fair comparison.
I know. But if you're working for Roger Corman, you only worked for scale with no back end points, unfortunately. So I got the princely sum of $12,500 for that movie.
Wow.
Yeah.
Pretty good,
You
though.
get paid.
That
Yeah.
was, that was decent money back then. Plus, considering all of the screenplays that I had written up until then that hadn't been produced, it was nice to know that somebody was actually going to take what I had written and put it into production, because
Yes.
that movie was going to happen, and it did happen. And now I use it as a great source of all kinds of anecdotes of the young writer's life. And one of the ones.
You've got an IMBD credit till the end of time. So
That's right. I do.
What more do you want?
That's nice. Very cool.
Yeah. And then and I learned stuff from it that stays with me today. And you could almost reflect back to what I just said at the beginning here, about always moving forward. Corman called me into the office once. This was very late in the process of writing the movie. I had written a couple of drafts here in Boston, and then got on a plane and went back out to Los Angeles to write the last draft. And I'm working down the hall from Corman, and he calls me into the office one day and says, the foreign distributors don't like the ending. You think you could come up with something better? And the young tyro screenwriter that I am, I perch on the edge of the sofa and begin to spin. I say, okay, how about this? How about if the monster attacking the dock at the end of the movie? They're breaking the dock apart. People are falling into the water. In the water, the monsters are killing all of the people that are falling into the water, and they're climbing up and out, and they're chasing women all around. But Doug McClure, remember him?
Oh,
Doug
I do.
McClure.
Yeah.
Doug McClure was our hero. Doug McClure is out in the harbor in his fishing boat, and he's got a 50-gallon drum of gasoline on his boat. And he takes the gasoline and dumps it into the water, and then he pulls out his flare gun and fires a flare into the water, and the whole harbor explodes, and we kill all of the monsters except for one that we saved for the sequel. Roger Corman looks at me and he goes, yes, explosions. I like explosions. The audience likes explosions. You remember this for the rest of your career. When in doubt, blow something up.
I love it. That's fabulous.
Wise words.
And I saw him many years later and told him that story again. And he said, well, what I was really trying to get across to you was something that the great Southern California detective novelist Raymond Chandler used to say was his best advice to young writers. When you run out of ideas, bring in a man with a gun. Introduce conflict, and by introducing conflict, you're raising the stakes of your story, you're cranking it up, you're heightening the intensity, and that's what will keep people turning pages. So Corman understood.
That's fascinating.
That's why
and
he lasted
all these
so long.
years, I thought The Land That Time Forgot was Doug McClure's best picture. But as it turns out, no. It's Humanoids from the Deep, clearly.
That's right. That's
Well,
right.
This is really good advice that you're giving. And honestly, it kind of brings us to the next thing we'd like to talk about, because many of our listeners are writers and are very interested in the process. Would you, to start with, would you label yourself a pantser or a planner when you're starting out on a novel?
I have been both. Earlier novels like Back Bay, and all of the Peter Fallon novels, which are the buried treasure stories that go back in time and forth in time. I've really plotted most of those books out very carefully from beginning to end, simply because they're so big and they cover such long spans of time, and the plot is so complicated that you have to do it that way. But as I've gotten older, with December 41 and actually with the Lincoln letter earlier, I did not plot them quite so much. I simply signposted. I said, okay, at this moment in this book, I'm going to have to be at this point. Uh, have the I want to have the raid in Southern California, and then we'll see where that goes. And at the end, I want to have a train trip. We'll see where that goes. And then, of course, at the end, I want to have a big spectacle on
Mhm.
Christmas Eve on the South Lawn and the ellipse with the German assassin in the crowd, et cetera, et cetera. And then I just let it all roll from that point. I got in my head who the characters were. And it works either way, and
Mhm.
I have always found that whatever outline I've written, I usually digress from very quickly anyway.
Sure, sure.
Uh,
So maybe like a rough
right,
outline to get
right,
you started and to keep you on track, but of
right.
course, we all
My
know that things change as we start to write, of course.
my training as a screenwriter, when I started out, had begun and ended basically with the treatment, you know? In
Mhm.
order to sell the screenplay, you wrote a present tense
Mm,
prose retelling of the screenplay that was like 20 pages rather than 120 pages.
mhm.
And that was the basis on which you would try to sell your screenplay. And um, and so that was sort of what I started doing with the novels. And that helped me to sell my first novel in on the basis of an outline,
Oh,
which
wow.
was which even in the late
For a novel.
70s,
Wow.
yeah, yeah,
Is that
even in the
Cape
late
Cod?
70s, that was pretty rare. Um,
Wow.
but after that, uh, I said, "Okay, this seems to be the way it works for me."
Mhm,
And the problem was I'd spend a year planning all that stuff out.
mhm.
Um, the other way, though, by being a seat of the pantser, you can lose months of your time by following a pathway that doesn't work
It
out.
doesn't go out.
Then you
Yeah,
have to then you have to cut it out. You know, oh no, this
yeah.
story needs to go in another direction.
Well, I like what you said. You found what works for you. I
Yeah,
think that that's most critical. I think every writer
yeah,
needs to find what works for them. So what does your
yeah.
typical writing day look like for you?
Well, I come up here about 8 o'clock in the morning and sit down and stay here for about 4 hours. Then we
Mhm.
go out and have lunch, and we go for a walk in the woods or something like that. And then I come back up around 2 and I stay till 6. And
That
in
sounds
truth,
idyllic to me. I love it.
yeah, yeah. I haven't
Nice,
worked
nice.
quite as hard of late, but uh, I'll get back to it. I promise.
Well, you just had a new one. You had a
Right,
release last summer, so
right.
you gotta kinda
And
get the
yeah.
engines chugging again. Yeah.
So I'm
Mhm.
taking life a little bit easier now, I guess.
Nice.
Well, I
But I
think
have
you've
another
earned
book
that.
planned. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You do
I
you
think
have planning your next one? That's good.
yeah, yep.
So,
Um,
in addition to that IMDb credit,
yeah,
you've actually received, quite a few awards for your writing.
yeah.
The
I've
Robert
had a
B.
few
Parker
along the way.
Award,
Yeah, yeah,
Samuel Eliot Morrison Award,
yep.
and the New England Book Award,
Yes.
given to an author whose body of work stands as a significant contribution to the culture of the region. That's pretty
That's pretty
impressive.
nice,
Yes, that
considering all
please.
the other authors that have contributed to the culture of this region. That's a pretty nice one. Uh,
Not bad. Must
It's
have
not
felt
bad at
good.
all.
yeah, yeah. And
Well, one last question
yep,
then, because you knew when you hinted that you were working on something else now that I was gonna ask. What
yeah.
can you tell us about the next project?
Well, it's going to bring back the main characters, the ones who are left standing at the end of December 41.
Okay,
Uh,
Direct sequel.
nice.
right. And
Cool.
it's going to revolve around the Russian efforts to get their hands on the nuclear secrets in 1945.
Uh-huh.
Mm,
And I think it'll be pretty good.
I think that's a great, and it's not a story that's been overtold and
No, it isn't
kind
really.
of timely. So
Despite Oppenheimer, despite the movie, they don't really get into any of that in the movie.
yeah.
But you can kind of maybe link to that interest though.
So I've either caught that wave, or I'm ahead of it, or I'm back in the backwash someplace. But I don't care anymore. Once you get a good idea, you want to stay with it. And I have a couple of more books planned in my head. We'll see how that turns out. And it's we are all fortunate to be able to do this for a living. And as I say to friends sometimes when they ask me if I've retired, I say, well, no, wait a minute. Most of the people I know who retire will say to me, now I'm going to do what you do.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'll always say, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, I'll always say, good luck. And in my mind, I'll be saying, they're going to find out that this is a job too. But it's also a very fulfilling one. So
that's fantastic. Hey, Bill, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
And it's always fun to talk to you guys. Come and visit us in Boston.
Oh, yes, please.
Love
Yeah.
to.
Absolutely.
Remember when this is what a nice guy this guy is. When we were doing that small group retreat and he came down from Boston to sit in on the small group. Boy, those people got their money's worth. You are the best.
Well, thank you for having me. It's always great. Good to see you guys.
Very good to see you. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Just a few parting words. Lara, tell us about what's going on with your novel, Red Rain, in Australia. Is that right?
In Australia. It was selected for a promotion in Australia. It'll be on sale all through the month of November. So any of our listeners in Australia, hop on over and take advantage of that sale.
And we have some too, so I'll flag that in the show notes. Australians, click here. And I'm going to remind you that my new novel, Partners in Crime, has also been released. This is the 7th book in the Daniel Pike series, and technically the 20th, or if you count Final Verdict, the 21st appearance for Ben Kincaid. Dan's back in the courtroom after a hiatus of several years while I wrote other things like The Florentine Poet and other books. I don't know why I did that, because The Florentine Poet is not over my head right now. But it could be.
It was, viewers, it was earlier, so just know that.
And for that matter, neither is Partners in Crime, which is the book I'm actually talking about.
Right Listen, send me a little digital image of it. I'll put it right there.
Can you do that? Fantastic. Great. Well, it's Dan Pike back again with Ben Kincaid and even the Grim Reaper, kind of, sort of. So you want to check that out. All right. Until next time, hey, keep writing. And remember, you cannot fail if you refuse to quit. See you next time.